I think the likelihood, I don't think they're going to go 17-0. I think they'll stumble at some point. I mean, maybe one of those games against the Giants, maybe the Cowboys on Christmas Eve, even though I think the Eagles are better than those teams. But
I'm Kelly in the house with Sports Radio WID. DK, were you on the air this morning? You look a little tired.
I was not on the air this morning. I'm on the air tomorrow morning overnight, but maybe a little tired nonetheless. But I was not on last night. No.
I know the feeling, my man. These NFL nights are crazy. But I guess I wanted to start. I didn't think I was going to be talking about this on Tuesday morning, but did you feel Frank Reich was the scapegoat in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I do. I don't think what happened to Frank Reich is really fair. But, Jeff, that situation is interesting because I think everybody shares the blame. It does seem like they're scapegoating Frank Reich. But let's face it, the writing was all on the wall for Frank Reich when the Carson Wentz thing didn't work out. Like, he tethered his future in Indianapolis to Carson Wentz. He convinced Jim Irsay that was the move to make. It didn't work, obviously. I think ever since that happened, he was kind of on thin ice in Indianapolis. And unless things went really well this year, he was going to go at some point. And obviously, things blew up in their face. So I wasn't completely surprised that he got let go. I'm a little surprised it happened in season. But once the Carson Wentz thing didn't work out, the writing was on the wall for Frank Reich.
I'm really upset by what's happening in Indianapolis right now. So they lose a game. They bench Matt Ryan because their offensive line's bad, and they put in Sam Ehlinger. Then they lose another game. Okay, you fire Marcus Brady, their offensive coordinator. Now you lose another game, you fire Frank Reich. Like, what is going on with that organization? Who would want to coach there right now?
Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, Jim Irsay is, I think he's gotten lucky with a lot of his success. And it's interesting because you look at the Colts and you look at the Eagles, they've been similar organizations success-wise over the last 20 years. With Indianapolis, though, I feel like a lot of that's been them lucking into two generational quarterbacks. They get Peyton Manning, they get Andrew Luck. Other than that, not a whole lot to speak of. But with the Eagles, I think it's been a lot more the infrastructure and Jeffrey Lurie building that organization because the Eagles haven't necessarily lucked in to great quarterbacks. They've had to do things a different way. Obviously, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman have done a really good job building this organization. But in Indianapolis, I mean, if they weren't, able to luck into those two quarterbacks, who knows where they'd be. And this whole deal of hiring Jeff Saturday is absurd. Like, if you're a coach on that staff, if you're a player in that locker room, how can you have any sort of, confidence or respect in that guy's your head coach when Frank Reich gets let go? Qualified people on the staff aren't being promoted to that position. I just think they've really blundered everything there in Indianapolis.
Can you imagine being Gus Bradley right now? You were a head coach in this league, and you get passed over for a guy his high school coaching experience it's high school. That's what it is. It's high school coaching experience, and you were an NFL head coach, not a good one, but you can't be an interim head coach. Steve Wilkes is an interim head coach right now.
Right, and it's like I don't even know what kind of head coach Jeff Saturday is going to be. I mean, he could come in, he could be a good head coach. Who knows? But this isn't his staff. He has no information as to how things were being run prior to him coming in here. And, I think a lot of people are going to look at this and they're not going to trust him. They're going to think he's Jim Irsay's guy, which he is. And that's not a healthy environment for an organization to have a guy like that being your head coach. I just think it's been terribly handled in every way by Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard.
Do you think the Colts make a big splash? I still think they should get Peyton Manning in there, but what do you think?
Maybe. I honestly, I don't think Peyton has a whole lot of interest in coaching at this point. I mean, he's making so much money doing the things that he is doing with he and Eli on Monday Night Football. And I don't know if that's something that would really work. I just think that's an organization that they've won a lot, no doubt about it. But you've seen over the last couple of years, if you don't have a quarterback and they had two great ones for a long time, but that's where the flaws in the organization really start to show up when you don't have that guy. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I should have clarified. I meant bringing Peyton Manning as a consultant, kind of like how he was with Denver. So that might be the move. Who knows? But let's get to the NFC East here. And one of the reasons why I brought up the Colts was the Eagles do play them in 13 days, and the Giants play them, and the Cowboys still play them. It kind of feels like now they're automatic wins.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the Eagles, I mean, they should be able to win these games in the division. They should be able to win most of the games they play for the rest of the year. So I think when you look at those kind of teams, those are the kind of games that the Eagles should be able to win. Clearly,
What's the vibe at WIP right now in terms of the Eagles? Like, what are you guys discussing? Like, when are they going to lose? Like, how good is this team? Or are you feeding into the Twitter hate with the schedule and everything?
yeah. Well, it's been interesting, Jeff, because when you look at the Eagles, I mean, the last couple of weeks, it's been kind of a non-story. I mean, obviously, the Phillies run has captivated the entire city. We've been talking a lot of I've done a lot of shows over the last month. I don't remember when the last time I really talked about the Eagles at length was, because we've been talking so much about the Phillies. So, which is crazy considering the Eagles are undefeated. It really does bring you back to those 2008, 2009, 10 years. So obviously now I think the attention is going to shift and we're going to move back into Eagle mode now. But for this team to be 8-0, be where they are, and do it as quietly as they have done it in this city has been really interesting. I think the focus is really going to shift back probably later parts of this week once we finish dissecting all the Philly stuff into Eagles mode. And there are high expectations for this team, and there really should be at this point.
I'll tell you what was weird on Friday morning. I know a lot of people who are diehard Phillies and Eagles fans, and I had to do the Eagles game for CBS on Thursday. So Friday morning, I'm getting texts. Hey, what happened in the Eagles game? I'm like, are you serious? Like, well, I know they won. I'm like, you guys didn't watch any of the game, did you? Like, any single bit. I'm like, you guys know it was tied in the second half, right? They're like, wait, it was? And it just seemed like that was a blip on the radar compared to what happened.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're going up against Game 5 of the World Series, so it is understandable. And I was in the same boat. I was down at the game hosting postgame for WIP that night, Phillies postgame. So, I was down at the Phillies game. I get home at like 3 a.m, and then I put on, the first half of the Eagles game that night. But it's crazy. And for us as hosts of the radio station, I think it's honestly somewhat refreshing in a way because – we talk so much football because that's what people care about the most. But, now to really dive into this Eagles season with them being 8-0, it's pretty cool. A pretty cool dynamic that we haven't had in a while because let's face it, the Phillies haven't been all that good.
When do you think the Eagles will actually lose a football game?
You know what, Jeff? I don't know. I look at the schedule ahead here. I don't think they're losing Monday night. I'll say this about Washington. They've been playing hard. They've been more competitive since Taylor Heineke's come in there. Kind of a shame for the fans that they won't get to see Carson Wentz return to the link to play, unfortunately. But I don't think they're losing that game. I mean, they're not losing to Indianapolis now. That's a complete disaster. And I think the odds are pretty good that Frank Reich's going to be communicating with Nick Sirianni leading into that game in terms of the things to attack Indianapolis. Green Bay on Sunday night, a few weeks ago, I said that's a possibility. I don't think that's happening. So I think the likelihood, I don't think they're going to go 17-0. I think they'll stumble at some point. I mean, maybe one of those games against the Giants, maybe the Cowboys on Christmas Eve, even though I think the Eagles are better than those teams. But, yeah, I mean, I'd imagine they stumble at some point, but I have trouble seeing it happen anytime over the next 3 weeks.
Which is kind of crazy to think about because we thought this whole Colts, Packers, Titans stretch at the beginning of the year was going to be their toughest portion of the schedule. And now it's just looking like it's Tennessee and that's it. How disappointing has the Packers been this year?
Oh, I mean, they're a disaster. I mean, I'm watching that game on Sunday. Their offense is completely broken. And I mean, I don't know if it all can be attributed to Devontae Adams. I think certainly some of it can. And I think that was kind of an oversight by the organization, honestly, to not realize how important that guy was to the offense and how that offense functions. But they're a complete disaster. Aaron Rodgers, I don't know. It's hard to see from the outside. It doesn't look to me like his heart's really in it anymore. But yeah, they're a mess, and I think the Eagles are going to roll over that team.
What's so frustrating about the Packers is, and they are playing the Cowboys Sunday, so they are pretty relevant right now for the show. What bothers me with them is it just felt like, you're right, Rodgers' heart was never in it. I don't think he knew whether he wanted to go to another team or not, or if he felt Green Bay was the best situation for him. But it feels like he should have been in Denver, and Russell Wilson probably should have been somewhere else.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what everybody anticipated, including the Broncos. Like, let's face it, the Broncos don't hire Nathaniel Hackett unless they think they're getting Aaron Rodgers. And I think that's kind of been a ripple effect where, Rodgers and Wilson coming into this year, you'd think comparable players, but there's a difference between a guy knowing the coach, knowing the system. Wilson hasn't had success in Denver. Rodgers hasn't had success in Green Bay. I think if Rodgers is in Denver, maybe things are a little different for the Broncos. Like maybe Hackett and Rodgers have that kind of working relationship and the knowledge of each other, that maybe that plays out, a little bit differently. But it doesn't feel like the situation in Green Bay is healthy. And it hasn't really felt like Rodgers and Matt LaFleur have ever really had a great relationship.
Which is weird considering all the games they won. I mean, Matt LaFleur had one of the greatest starts for a head coach ever. But yeah, you're right. The dynamic always seemed off with them, and now it's really off because I don't even know who Aaron Rodgers throws to anymore. Like Romeo Dobbs is hurt now. It just feels like I don't know. Aaron Rodgers just took a lot of money and ran.
Yeah, and and he did it at the expense of Devontae Adams. And I know the story out there is that Devontae Adams wanted to go back home, wanted to go to Vegas. Maybe that's true to an extent, but I think they probably could have found a way to work it out. Aaron Rodgers, I think, really wanted that big payday before the end of his career. He got it, but unfortunately for him, you lose your best receiver, and I think there's a chance that this at least it puts a little damper on the end of his career. I'm not ready to say it's going to tarnish his legacy. He's still one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen. But certainly, a poor way to end your career if this is the way it happens and Green Bay doesn't turn it around.
Who's the next head coach to get fired?
Next head coach get fired. I think Ron Rivera has got to be on the list at least. Maybe the way the Commanders have been playing lately saves him a little bit. I mean, I don't think Dan Campbell ever should have been hired. So maybe he's on that list as well. They'd probably be the two guys at the top of the order right now, unless there's anybody I'm forgetting about. But yeah, I think
maybe
Josh McDaniels. I mean, Josh McDaniels. He just shouldn't ever be hired as a head coach again. They've been so disappointing. Maybe Nathaniel Hackett, as we talked about, he's been a disaster. So, I mean, there are a lot of options out there, and I think we're going to see a lot of head coaching vacancies at some point this offseason for sure.
I agree with you. So it's kind of crazy. It's week 9, and I've already had to write potential Colts candidates, potential Panthers candidates, and to be honest, I think that as bad as these organizations look, the Panthers might be more attractive than the Colts right now. But the problem lies in, and one thing the Eagles don't have, they don't have a quarterback, and the Eagles do, and that's why these teams seem to win games.
Yeah, and I think the common thread with all these teams, and it's why people need to appreciate the Eagles more, is these are just dysfunctional organizations that don't make good decisions for the long term. Like the Panthers, and I'm a Temple guy. I like PJ Walker. What are the Panthers doing starting PJ Walker over Baker Mayfield last week? It doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't do you anything for your long term. It doesn't make sense considering what you just traded to get Baker Mayfield. Play Baker, at least see what you have in that quarterback. And, you see the decisions a lot of these organizations are making. They just reek of dysfunction. They don't make a lot of sense. And when you look at Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman, you can get on them for draft picks or whatever, whenever they, will make the mistakes that they make. But they always have a plan, and what they do always makes sense. And with a lot of these other organizations, I think you're seeing that that's just not the case.
How about A.J. Brown putting in the subtle jabs at the Titans on Sunday night? No one's open, and he has more receiving yards than the Titans do as a team. That Titans trade is just looking worse and worse for them by the week.
He's a great player, and he's better than I thought. I mean, I watched A.J. Brown the past few years. I knew he was dynamic. I didn't know he was this great. I mean, the way he has changed the Eagles' offense, the way Tennessee's offense has kind of fallen apart without him, and that was always, a heavy run offense, but you need that dynamic receiver to be a threat on the outside. I mean, Tennessee's offense the other night was completely non-existent. I don't think it's fair to put it all on Malik Willis. I do think he struggled significantly in the second half, but yeah, I mean, A.J. Brown's a great player, and I mean, all you have to do is look at what's happened to the Eagles offense and what's happened to Tennessee's offense to see that.
I've been bold enough to say, I don't even know if it's bold anymore to say the Eagles are the best team in the NFL at the midway point. Do you feel the same?
I would say right now, yes. Are they the favorites to win the Super Bowl? I'm still a little unsure about because, hey, if Josh Allen ends up being healthy, and we'll see, the Bills, I think, have an extremely dynamic offense. Kansas City, the same. So I would say the Eagles right now, certainly I think they're the best team in the NFC. But Kansas City and Buffalo, I still think if they were to meet down the line are difficult matchups.
Yeah. What's tough for me is right now, I think a lot of Eagles fans are starting to, I don't want to say believe in it, but I think they're looking at, okay, who is going to beat the Eagles in the NFC? But I still think Dallas is their biggest threat, even though they beat them already. And they beat Minnesota too. But I got to ask you, who is the Eagles' biggest threat right now to unseat them?
I think it's San Francisco. I think you look at San Francisco with that defense. D'Amico Ryans, I think, is a really bright defensive coordinator. Speaking of head coaching vacancies, I think D'Amico Ryans, if he wants a head coaching job this offseason, he should certainly get one. So I'd say San Francisco. I think Minnesota is a really good team. I think that's why, the Eagles beating them in the fashion they did earlier this year is so impressive because I think Minnesota is a good team. But I would say San Francisco, then Minnesota, then if you had to go to a team after that, probably Dallas.
What's crazy with San Francisco is I keep wanting to believe in them. I think they are going to be really good, but Seattle is not going away. I still can't believe what Seattle's doing. I mean, there's a really good potential here. They could beat Tampa and go 7-3 this week.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I think that's a team the Eagles would beat clearly if they were to see them in the playoffs, but got to give Geno Smith credit. He's playing really well. And that's another organization where, at least there's consistency. At least, they know what they're doing as an organization. They know what they want to do. And it's a credit to Pete Carroll and the team that he's built and the culture that he's built there, that they've really, I think, rallied around Geno and rallied around this whole Russell Wilson wanted out thing. And hey, I mean, sometimes that works out for you, and it's worked out for Seattle this year.
Doesn't it feel like, last few years we kept hearing Russell Wilson wants out. Russell Wilson wants to get traded. Doesn't it feel like the Seahawks wanted to trade Russell Wilson when they felt it was right to trade Russell Wilson?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was probably the right move is they waited it out, and they waited it out as long as they could. I mean, Russell Wilson clearly didn't want to be there anymore. But I'm not going to lie to you. I wanted the Eagles trade for Russell Wilson. I'm really glad they didn't, considering the way things have panned out. Because I think Russell, for a quarterback, you do need that respect to your teammates. And it doesn't feel like guys rally around Russell Wilson. And I think you're seeing that. We've heard from guys in the past in Seattle, and the guys in Denver this year don't really seem to love the things that are going on with him either. So I think Seattle handled that well.
What's crazy to me is I remember in free agency season, I kept hearing, hey, the Eagles are after Allen Robinson. They really want Allen Robinson. I'm like, can you believe we would probably be living in a world right now where Russell Wilson was the Eagles quarterback and Allen Robinson was the receiver? How mad would Eagles fans be if that actually came into fruition?
That would not have been an ideal scenario for sure, Jeff. I mean, Allen Robinson has not done much, obviously, this year in LA. And again, Howie Roseman doing the smart things, not mortgaging the future for Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson obviously played into it as well. He didn't really want to come here, but sometimes you get lucky. And the Eagles, to a degree, got lucky. Now they have Jalen Hurts, who I think everybody feels comfortable in being the franchise quarterback. You got A.J. Brown, and this team's in a really good position, not just this year, but moving forward, because you look at last night, The Saints lose again. They look terrible. And the Eagles have that first-round pick. It's just incredible where they are right now.
I think the Saints definitely overvalued their roster.
Yeah, without a doubt. That's another team. I guess it really doesn't matter. But if I was them, I'd prefer to see Jameis Winston out there than Andy Dalton. I mean, I think we all know what Andy Dalton is at this point in his career. But that team is really bad, and they looked really bad last night against Baltimore.
By the way, how about Deshaun Jackson coming back? He already hurt his hamstring. I feel bad for the guy. I really do, because you can see when he doesn't get hurt, he does make an impact on that game.
Yeah, and I love Deshaun Jackson. I mean, he's a great Eagle. What he did from 08 to 13 here, that first stint in Philadelphia, he was tremendous. But he's one of those guys, he's just done. Like, the body just doesn't respond the way it needs to anymore for him. And I give him credit for still trying to play. He obviously wants to still play. But sometimes that body just gives out. And I think that's where Deshaun is at this point.
Yeah, what's crazy is I know a couple Ravens writers, and they were telling me last night, like, dude, can you believe how open he gets, like, just from the press box view? I'm like, I can believe it because I've seen it. And I think they were amazed at 35, 36. I forget how old Deshaun is now, but how he's able to still separate the top off defenders. But it really is a shame because the Ravens need somebody in wide receiver. I want to keep believing in them. I think they're good enough to go to Super Bowl, but it just seems like their holes are going to show up in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think it's really difficult when you're so reliant on one player offensively, and they are so reliant on Lamar Jackson to do everything for them. Everything's based off, the kind of option situation with the running back and the quarterback, and that sets up both their run game and their pass game. And I think it's really difficult when you put that much pressure on one player, because there's a lot of pressure on Lamar Jackson to do everything for that offense. And, I don't think they've done a tremendous job of surrounding him either and giving him the talent that he needs to really ascend his game to the next level.
Do you care when people say, or people call him the WIP, well, the Eagles haven't played anybody?
I don't really care. I mean, I understand why people say that. I don't necessarily agree because, as we talked about, I think Minnesota is a good team. I think Dallas is a good team. But I think in certain respects, I think people get a little oversensitive to that kind of thing. Like, as far as like analysts saying the Bills are better than the Eagles and people get upset about that, I don't really have a problem with that, honestly. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that the Bills and Chiefs could be better than the Eagles. So it doesn't really bother me. I don't agree with it, but it doesn't really bother me that much.
Yeah. I've had people get upset at me too when I say the Bills are better, and it's all hypothetical, right? Because the Eagles don't play them. It's one of those weird years where the competition where the Eagles are, this is the stratosphere they're in, they just don't play them. So it's kind of hard to actually measure their success compared to the Bills and the Chiefs. I mean, the only way you're going to see them is in Glendale.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, I think, it's just people want their team to get respect. And I understand that to a degree. But these other teams are good teams. Like Buffalo and Kansas City, when they're at full strength, they're really good teams. So we'll see down the line, hopefully. And then hopefully down the line, they'll be able to settle on the field.
Yeah, I'll add one for you, too. So I gave the Giants a ton of credit on Twitter the other week. I said, hey, look, what they're doing is so impressive. And I put, and by the way, they separated themselves from the pack in a mediocre league. And Giants fans just took mediocre league and ran with it. Like, so the Giants are only good when the league's mediocre. And I'm thinking to myself, guys, I just gave your football team credit. Like, yes, the league is mediocre this year.
Yeah, honestly, I'd go a step further. I think the league's been bad this year. Like, Jeff, there's been a lot of bad football. Like, and I mean, I don't know why it seems so much worse this year, but I feel like every week you're watching these games and it's just like, it's not a good brand of football being played. It's not necessarily entertaining a lot of these games. And I don't know why it's gotten so much worse this year, but it seemed like a really bad year in the NFL.
Do you think it's lack of reps in the preseason?
I don't know. I've been a big proponent of not, playing as much in the preseason. I don't necessarily think so because look at the Eagles. The Eagles play less in the preseason than pretty much anybody, and that's their approach. I mean, they get their work in practice, and the Eagles will look great. So I don't know if that's necessarily what you can attribute it to. I think the NFL is just a cyclical league. And for whatever reason this year, maybe it's, all the moves being made, all the changes that have been made in the league and just teams being shaken up differently. But it's been really weird because it's been a lot of bad football played this year.
One team I've given a ton of credit for, and I think they've kind of started this whole trend right now, is the Falcons. And we know we're not a good football team. We know we can't outbeat you throwing the football. But we can run it, and we can run it with anybody. And it feels like teams like them, teams like the Bears, they're competitive because they can run the football. They can control time of possession. They're getting points on the board.
Yeah, no, and that obviously, has worked for teams like that. Atlanta's been one of the surprise teams this year, and if you can run the football and you can control the clock, at least that gives you something offensively. And so much of the NFL these days comes down to finishing drives with touchdowns instead of field goals, and in a lot of instances, that's the difference between winning and losing.
Where would you rank Nick Sirianni right now in terms of NFL coaches?
I would put him top 3 to top 5. I mean, criticize the Eagles organization for a lot, but one thing they know how to do, and they've done consistently, they know how to hire coaches, and they get good results, at least in the short term. Whether it's Andy, whether it's even Chip was successful in the short term, Doug Peterson, Nick Sirianni over time. I think it's difficult to sustain winning. We've seen that everywhere, but the Eagles are good at hiring coaches, and Nick Sirianni's done a great job. And seeing Indianapolis, the impact of him leaving has certainly had a negative effect on that franchise.
What's been your take on Doug Peterson in Jacksonville so far?
Not great, honestly. I'm disappointed with the lack of development by Trevor Lawrence. I still think Trevor Lawrence has the potential to be really good. Obviously, that was a huge win for them coming back against the Raiders this past Sunday because that division is still very much up for grabs. But I was hoping Doug would have a little more success this year in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, 3-6 is it's weird, right? Because he already passed Urban Meyer for wins, and it does look like a couple more wins are coming. And this is what's interesting about Jacksonville, Tom. They have a positive point differential, so it's not like they're losing badly. They're just losing close games.
Yeah, and hey, that was a lot of the story here in 2020 as well. I mean, the Eagles. And it's hard. That season now seems like so long ago, but I felt that year like the Eagles lost a lot of close games. Like they weren't getting killed week after week after week for the most part. But yeah, I think obviously with Jacksonville, they're still in it, certainly. But they need to find a way to start winning these close games.
Do you think Carson Wentz does eventually become the starter in Washington again?
I mean, I don't understand why he would. Maybe because of the contract. But if I'm them, I'm moving forward with Heineke. This season becomes about seeing if he can be my quarterback moving forward because they got to figure out whether they're going to draft somebody this offseason. But I don't think Carson's your guy long term. I think that's pretty clear.
Before I let you go, we got to do the 7 playoff teams in the NFC since we're at the midway point. Who would you pick right now?
Obviously the Eagles, Vikings. I still think the Bucs are going to find a way to win the South. I'm not ready to write Tom Brady off yet. The Niners, Cowboys, I think are going to make it. Honestly, at this point, I think the Giants probably do make it. I've come around on them from the last time we talked. So I think the Giants make it. And then I think there are a lot of teams in that 7 range, whether it's the Rams, whether it is the Falcons potentially getting in. I kind of don't think the Packers get there at this point, but if I had to choose, actually, I'd probably say the Seahawks. I'd probably say the Seahawks are that 7 team.
Yeah, it's weird, right? The Giants and the Seahawks, you keep saying to yourself, okay, they're going to fall. And then you watch them more and more, and you're like, you know what? I don't think they're going to. So someone that's good is going to be left out of this.
Right, yeah. And at least teams that we perceive to be good, like the Rams thought they're going to be very good. They haven't been. So, yeah, I think at this point, the Giants and Seahawks, we're deep enough into the season where you start looking at this as much more real than we did about a month ago.
TK, once again, my friend, I appreciate you coming on. I'll have to get you on again, maybe in a couple weeks here. But, maybe the Eagles will be 10-0 by then. Who knows?
Maybe. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for coming on, TK. I appreciate it.